Good morning. We have a special gift. Emily Diltz baked some cookies, of which I'm forgetting the name of, but they are the traditional cookies eaten during Purim, which is the feast that like Esther is the origin story for. So I'm going to pass them around, and what she said is that there is a poppy seed one and an apricot one. The poppy seed is the traditional one that's eaten, but the apricot last night was the winner. And so there's not many left in there. And so if you are brave and not bashful, still the apricot. No, she came last night and then left them for you all today. I also have this that I am going to pass around when there's not cookie goo on your fingers. This is thank Emily for this is a scroll of Esther. And it's a print of one. It's not the oldest collection of Esther, but what is really cool, and you'll see, is this art that's on it. And so some of the art that's on here I have in our presentation for next week. But like right here, this is the scene where Vashti has the banquet for the women. And then over here is like where the king calls everyone in. We are people who miss out on visual Bibles, but a lot of old scrolls, and sometimes you'll see me have a picture and I'll say this is from an old scroll. Their Bibles were illustrated, and people didn't have all their Bibles at their house. Also, it's got English on one side. It's kind of cool. But this scroll, someone might spend a year illustrating and writing, and this would be passed around to different churches. And so, you might be at a cathedral and they're like, we're going to study Esther this week. And they would roll it out and you would be able to go see it. And so I'm going to pass this around. Scribes, right? Yes, yeah. And people spend a lot of work on these.
These
and,
cookies are delicious.
This was my wedding gift to Rachel, and so I just ask you don't get the cookie goo on it, because it was a fight for her to let me bring this. I want to show you too when I pass this around. There's this pendant on the top, and it's Esther coming before the king, and he's holding out a scepter or a staff, and you'll see that in a lot of the art of Esther. And some other pieces I have too. That is one of the main kind of images for Esther, is this part of the king holding out the staff. No one could go before the king unless that they were called by name. And if they intruded on the king, they could be put to death just for showing up in his court. And if he did not hold out this staff to accept you, then you could be put to death. So every time in the story when Esther goes before the king, which we'll read about today, it's this implication of this could be, my last moment alive. And so this picture of her here is all of the beauty and the wisdom and the bravery of Esther put on display. And so it's not just me who likes art with the scepter. That's a pretty common picture for Esther, if you see that. So this is not her being submissive. It's her being badass. I mean, she's awesome going up before the king. I want to also draw your attention to this art that I have. I mentioned this last week. It's Lillian Braca, I think is her name. And here's a picture of her. She makes these murals and handmade, and that's like real gold that's being placed in them. She has ones of Mary Magdalene, she has them of Esther, she has one of other prominent women in the Bible and some other characters and such too. And I have her book on order that I purchased, and it was the last one available online, so that was kind of excited to be able to buy it. I don't have it yet.
It's a mosaic?
Yes. And so that I try to, if I can, use her collection of Esther as the art, except I didn't want to be too repetitive for some of them. But when I can, and you can purchase this, I told you, this is like $700 or something insane. But you can see how big these are. And so when you see the mural looking ones, it's all from her collection. and I'm still waiting to hear about what I am allowed to use after purchasing it. So I don't think I can print it out yet, but I'm waiting. And if I can, next week, I will have a printout about Esther as well. If I'm not allowed to use her art, I already have one on backup that I'll use instead.
Where does she exhibit? Do you know?
Yeah, where is she located?
Where are these?
I can get back with you
Okay.
about that. And I might include a link to her website because she goes in a lot of depth about why she chooses what she has, like why this is spirals right here, for instance, or like what that gold dragon represents, or why there are lions about. She has really well done art, and it's really, really great. So last thing I'm going to say about our schedule, there are two things that while teaching this class, I really wanted to do for ending here. And that was to be able to teach you about Esther and to go back through the book of Genesis. And so I'm just saying, this is an emotional kind of next 2.5 months for me. This will be my last 2.5 months here. And when we finish Genesis, that's my last week here. And I like that Sunday after this class will be my last Sunday on July 12th. And so I'm very excited for us to look at this. It's emotional for me to look at Esther and look at Genesis. I'm happy that I was able to fit it into our schedule. I wish we could have gone slower, but that's where we're at. So I am excited. I hope you will see the beauty, the wisdom, and the bravery of Esther as we go through, and we'll just jump straight into our presentation. Esther is an unknown book. We don't know who the author is. And also, there is a Greek and there is a Hebrew version. And so I want to draw your attention to the Bible Project video, or poster. There is 2 posters. Look first at the one where Esther is bigger. And so if there's 2 sides to it. One of them, Esther, is smaller and says 2nd edition. Look at the main poster. Esther is bigger. It does not say 2nd edition. This is a poster of Esther as you know it. But that is not the only version of Esther. There is a main Hebrew version. And then there is also a Greek version of Esther. And that is what's on the other side. In our last class on Esther, so in 4 weeks, we will discuss the Greek version of Esther. And thankfully, the Bible Project has done a new series on the kind of apocryphal or Greek version of the Old Testament, so the Septuagint. And they have this poster available for free. Unfortunately, their video is not available on YouTube. It's not publicly available, but we will play it on that last week. But I'm not going to be able to send it out. You'll have to come in here to watch it. And I think I'm not supposed to record it either. And so it will not be on video. So you'll have to be here for that week. And it will talk about the Greek editions. Just like when we looked at Daniel, Esther and Daniel are very similar. They're books written in exile. They're part of the poetry section of the Tanakh, or of the Jewish Bible. They have various versions in these Greek editions that go on. And so that's what's going on here. The Greek version is the Septuagint. This is the version that Jesus probably read. It's also the version that the whole church used until about the 7th century. There was this guy named Jerome. He made the Latin Vulgate. That was the canon that the church used. And for some reason, I don't know why he did this, because he didn't do it with Daniel or other books, but he took all of the additions to Esther and just stuck them at the back of at the end of the book. And the way that Esther is set up, you can kind of see it. It's a very mirrored book. And so everything that happens in chapter 1 happens again in chapter 8. And the Greek edition adds an introduction and a prologue. And then in chapter 3 and in chapter 6, I think, it has this other extension and then same thing again. So there's these 6 editions. It's about 107 verses. And they just stuck them at the end. And it makes the book weird to read. We'll talk about it the last week. But I just want to draw your attention. Use the one where Esther's in the bigger letters for the main chart. There's a Greek and a Hebrew version. When I talk about Esther, I will be referencing both. And you'll see why in a second. So here's the setting for the book, when the events are sort of taking place. There is a king who is mentioned. Scholars would think that king is probably referring to Xerxes the First. And if you looked it up in a commentary, it would say Xerxes the First. Some translations even remove the Hebrew name of the king and put Xerxes the First. That's true if you're reading this in Hebrew. If you are reading this in Greek, it's probably referring to Xerxes' youngest son, Artaxerxes the First, or Artaxerxes' son, Artaxerxes the Second. And so that's why I have two dates. But you can just note it's sometime during the Persian rule, when the Median Persian Empire had conquered Babylon and therefore assumed the territories, including Israel. And it's happening in the capital of Susa. This is a book that never takes place in Israel. So it's a little different than some of the books that we have read, very similar to Daniel. It is probably written, the Hebrew version, sometime in the 3rd or 2nd century, and this should say BCE, not Common Era. Or in the Greek version would be in the 1st to 2nd BCE. Those dates are also there on the Bible Project video, if you want to look at it. And that would be sometime during the late Persian time or early Greek rule. And we're going to do a very, very, very brief history. And last night I did it in 3 minutes. So we're going to see if we can match that. Here is ancient Israel. Most of what we have read is happening here. 586 BCE is the big date. That's when Jerusalem gets conquered by Babylon. And all of these Israelites get carried off into Babylon. At that time, the people from Judah began to be called Jews. And so now we are Jews. We're not just Israelites because they don't live in Israel anymore. They're the people from Judah that worship the God of Judah. And this 70-year period in Babylon is when the book of Daniel takes place. The book of Esther is right after that, during the Persian rule. And then it probably gets written sometime at the end of that and into the Greek period, especially with the Greek version. Some of the Jews moved back. So in 539, the Persia-Mede Empire conquered the Babylonians, and they said, hey, we'll send you back to Israel, and you can build a temple and build the city walls again. You can read about that in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. Some of them stayed, because for 3 generations, they've lived in a new land. Their grandparents grew up in Babylon and in Persia and throughout this old empire. And so suddenly the Jews are spread all throughout the world. And that's where Esther takes place. It's no longer in Israel. It's a people who live in exile. They don't go to a temple. The temple doesn't exist now. They don't, not all of them speak Hebrew anymore. Some of them may speak Aramaic, but lots of them speak Greek. Some even speak what the Persians speak. And so there's a lot of language stuff that's going to go on. But we're dealing with centuries later than where we have been. So that's kind of where we are in history. That was less than 3 minutes. Woohoo! Okay, any questions on that little history piece?
Persia is Iran today?
Persia is Iran today. I'll have it on I'll go ahead and show you. Here's this yellow is the extent of the Persian Mede Empire at this time, centralized here in Iran, which is where the capital would have been. And then it got smaller over time. It didn't get bigger, it got smaller. Okay, that's where we are in history. Just keep in mind that we're in exile and we've been persecuted. That's the people we're writing to. Let's talk a little bit about the literary style. This is sort of like a historical novella. Are you familiar with what a burlesque is? Like a type of raunchy, kind of inappropriate satire, usually includes comedy and political commentary as well. A lot of scholars will look at the book of Esther and say this has some attributes of a burlesque. And so there are moments like when the king's wife is paraded around like an object. And she says, no, I'm not going to do that. Esther goes through beauty contests and things like that. there's an excessive amount of drinking. Like half the characters are drunk all the time when you read Esther. It's a little raunchy. And there's even a note about that on the Bible Project poster too. And because of that, Esther almost did not make it into our Bibles. And another fact about that, in the Hebrew version, prayer is never mentioned and God is never mentioned, which is very weird. In the Greek version, it is. It's also what we would call an etology, which is an origin story for the festival of Purim. Purim is not one of the main Jewish feasts. Like, it's not prescribed in the Torah. It's not as big of a deal as like Sabbath, or not Sabbath, oh my gosh, like Passover or something like that. But it's still a pretty big day. And the festival of Purim today is celebrated as a day for when Jews were rescued from persecution or annihilation. And for a people group that throughout time, I mean, lots of people groups are persecuted. Jews have been especially persecuted, no matter where they have lived throughout the world and throughout all of history. And so you can see the significance of Purim. And Esther is a story that celebrates that, how deliverance came when we faced extinction. And so Purim throughout different times in history has meant a big deal. And that's especially true for people that experienced that persecution. And Esther is seen as like the origin story for that. I want to make, yeah.
When is it? It says spring.
It's like sometime like March 2nd to March 4th. Or also, it depends on what city you live in for some reasons. If you're in a walled city, it's the next day versus if you're in an exposed city. And I don't quite understand why that is.
When you said it celebrates what again?
The deliverance from persecution or extinction.
Thank you.
And the story of Esther is kind of the story that they would read during the festival of Purim. It's also like you drink a lot during Purim too, to celebrate. Someone last night said it's like Mardi Gras for us. It's like, woohoo, yeah. And before that, you do an Esther fast. And then you have the Esther feast. And it's kind of cool. I want to make this note. I made this about Ruth as well. Do not think of this. Don't get into the stuck commentary conversation of, is this a historical fiction or is this a historical narrative? A lot of commentaries go off on all of these rants. There are elements of both things here, just like when we looked at Ruth. Esther is very similar to the book of Daniel in that the customs here are literary devices. They're not things that we find in historical record. The king, the Queen Vashti, they're not characters that we find in the historical record. We don't find Esther or Mordecai mentioned anywhere. It was not typical. In fact, it never happened that a Persian king would marry outside of 7 royal families. Okay, and so a lot of commentaries will do 2 things. They'll say, well, Esther doesn't matter because it has some things that we don't find in historical record. Or they'll like make weird brain jumps to try to tie them to historical figures, and people will fight. Well, was it Xerxes the first, or Artaxerxes the first, or Artaxerxes the second? And they'll spend like way too long talking about that. That's not the point of the story. This is like Daniel, where Esther and Daniel serve as a type or an archetype of the ideal Jew. And what that means for Esther is that it's not real in a place in history, it's real all the time. Because no matter where you find yourself as a person of God who lives in a foreign land, in a foreign place, in a foreign people, we are all called to follow God always. If you're a guy, look at Daniel. If you're a girl, look at Esther as the one who is the example to follow. And Esther is this picture of wisdom, bravery, and beauty. And she's just cool. And you'll see that when we look at her. She's awesome. She's my role model too. And so I would encourage you, when you look and you read the book of Esther, ask yourself, who is the king in my day? Ask yourself, who is the Haman who is trying to throw us off? What are the pressures trying to pull me away from God? And how can I be like Esther and rise for such a time as this? Which for me is the line that I love in the book of Esther. So don't get too caught up in this, is it historical fiction or historical narrative? It's not. It's poetry. It's in the poetry section. It's theological. And they are both serving as a type who are true all the time. And if you have more questions about that, you can ask me about it after. And every time I say that, no one ever does. But, if you do, you can come up. Here's a picture of Esther here from the collection. And she is, well, I'll go back. This picture shows up later. But I want to tell you about her name. At first, she is named Hadassah. So that's her Hebrew name. And it means myrtle. Fun fact, my cat's name is Hadassah, and my niece's name is Hadassah, because my family is one of those families that names people after Bible characters. Her Persian name is Esther, though. Just like Daniel. Daniel had a Jewish name, and then he had a Babylonian name, which was Belshazzar. They're different names. And so Esther's name, we know her as Esther. In Hebrew, it means hidden. But in Persian, it means star. And I think that's awesome. It's the root word for a Persian goddess, Ishtar. But it's bright and in your face. Esther goes from a hidden character. She hides who she is. She is hidden away in a palace. She is hidden in her actions. But she shines like a star by the end of the story. And so here, just in her name, we already get a picture in what we learn about Esther. When you're a person of God, you're out in a foreign and hostile land and people don't know God, don't stay hidden. Shine like a star. Okay, it's really cool. So now we're going to do Mordecai. Mordecai's name in Hebrew, this is my dog, Mordecai, who is named after Mordecai here. And we named him that because he's such a scary guard dog. Can't you tell? Yeah. Here's Mordecai in the collection that we have. So his name in Hebrew is crushed or oppressed. He's a guy living in exile. And Mordecai was older. It was his grandfather who gets carried off in the story into Babylon. And so he is still experiencing that displacement. In Persia, his Persian name, it's warrior. This warrior of Marduk is where his name comes from. And a lot of Persian names are named after their gods and goddesses. And so it's not that he worshipped Marduk or something like that. But he goes from the hidden, the oppressed one, the crushed or the oppressed one to one who fights back. And so it's telling you, don't let the culture take over you. Fight back against it. Shine bright like Esther does for God. Haman, just to talk about who he is, he's Haman the Agagite. That just meant he was descendant from the Amalekites. And the Amalekites, if you don't remember, are the mortal enemies of Israel. In particular, those from the tribe of Benjamin. And hold on to that because Mordecai is descended from the Benjamites. And so they are ancestral enemies when Haman and Mordecai meet each other, which helps explain some of the stuff that's going on, which today we would call racism. Haman's name is noise, or in Hebrew, it's noise or trouble. And in Persian, it's magnificent. And then the king's name, it's a transliteration of Xerxes or Artaxerxes. Either means ruler of heroes or king of kings, or ruler of truth, or ruler with righteousness, or rules with truth, something like that. And so I think it's really cool because this Persian king rules over the heroes, and the heroes of the story are the Israelites, or are the Jews, or those who follow God. So it's really cool. So there's some cool things going on with their name. All the minor characters also have names. And I was playing around with that, and I went back in my notes and deleted all their names because we're not going to do that. So here's Esther. If you weren't here before, there's a Hebrew version of Esther. There's a Greek version. Your chart has both, but we are going to begin by playing the Bible Project video, and then we'll jump straight into our chapters.
The book of Esther. It's one of the more exciting and curious books in the Bible. The story is set over 100 years after the Babylonian exile of the Israelites from their land. And while some Jews did return to Jerusalem, remember Ezra and Nehemiah, many did not. And so the book of Esther is about a Jewish community living in Susa, the capital city of the ancient Persian Empire. The main characters in this story are two Jews, Mordecai and then his niece Esther. And then there's the king of Persia, who's something of a drunken pushover in this story. And then there's the Persian official Haman, the cunning villain. Now this is a curious book in the Bible, mainly for the fact that God is never even mentioned. not once. Which might strike you as kind of odd. I mean, isn't the Bible about God? But this is a brilliant technique by the author, who's anonymous, by the way. It's an invitation to read this story looking for God's activity, and there are signs of it everywhere. The story is full of very odd, quote, coincidences and ironic reversals, and it all forces you to see God's purpose at work, but behind the scenes. Let's just dive into the story. The book opens with the king of Persia throwing 2 elaborate banquet feasts that last a total of 187 days, and it's all for the grandiose purpose of displaying his greatness and splendor. On the last day of the banquet feast, he's really drunk, and he demands that his wife, Queen Vashti, appear at the party to show off her beauty. She refuses, and so in a drunken rage, the king deposes Vashti and makes the silly decree that all Persian men should now be the masters of their own homes. Then he holds a beauty pageant because he wants to find a new queen. This is like a really bad soap opera. But it's right here that we're introduced to Esther and Mordecai. Esther hides her Jewish identity and enters the beauty pageant and wins. And the king is so obsessed with Esther that he elevates her to become the new queen of Persia. Now after this, and even more serendipitous, is the fact that Mordecai just happens to overhear 2 royal guards plotting to murder the king. And so he informs Esther, who in turn informs the king, and Mordecai gets credit for saving the king's life. Now right here from the beginning, God's not mentioned anywhere, but this all seems providentially ordered. What is it that God's up to? You have to keep reading. We're next introduced to Haman, who's not actually a Persian. He's called an Agagite. He's a descendant of the ancient Canaanites. Remember 1 Samuel chapter 15. The king elevates Haman to the highest position in the kingdom, and he demands that everybody kneel before Haman. Well, when Mordecai sees Haman, he refuses to kneel, which of course fills Haman with rage. And when he finds out that Mordecai is Jewish, Haman successfully persuades the king to enact this crazy decree to destroy all of the Jewish people. And to decide the date of the Jews' annihilation, Haman rolls the dice. A die is called pur in Hebrew. Tuck that away for later. 11 months later, on the 13th of Adar, all the Jews will die. Haman and the king then have a drinking banquet to celebrate their really horrible decision. So the focus now turns to Mordecai and Esther, who are the only hope for the Jewish people. They make a plan that Esther is going to reveal her Jewish identity to the king and ask him to reverse the decree. But approaching the king without a royal request is, according to Persian law, an act worthy of death. So in a key statement, Mordecai, he's confident that even if Esther remains silent, that deliverance for the Jews will arrive from another place. And then Mordecai wonders aloud. He says, who knows? Maybe you've become queen for this very moment. Esther responds with bravery, and she purposes to go to the king with her amazing words, if I perish, I perish. Now, in what unfolds, we watch the ironic reversal of all of Haman's evil plans. So Esther hosts the king and Haman at a first banquet, and she says that she wants to make a special request of both of them at an exclusive banquet the following day. So Haman leaves the banquet totally drunk, and he sees Mordecai in the street. He fumes with anger, and he orders that a tall stake be built so that Mordecai can be impaled upon it in the morning. It seems like things can't get any worse for the Jews and for Mordecai. But all of a sudden, the story pivots. It just so happens that night, the king, he can't sleep. And he has the royal chronicles read to him for good bedtime reading. And he just happens to hear about how Mordecai had saved the king's life. He had totally forgotten. So in the morning, Haman enters to request Mordecai's execution. And the king, in that moment, orders Haman to honor Mordecai publicly for saving his life. So now Haman has to lead Mordecai around the city on a royal horse, telling everyone to praise him. Now this moment in the story is a pivot for the whole book. It begins Haman's downfall and Mordecai's rise to power. Watch how this works. The day after is Esther's second banquet. So the king and Haman arrive, and Esther informs the king that first of all she's Jewish, and second, that Haman has enacted a decree to murder her and to murder Mordecai, who saved his life, and to murder all of the Jews. Now the king's had a lot to drink, so when he hears this news, he goes into yet one more drunken rage, and he orders that Haman be impaled on the very stake he made for Mordecai. It's ironic and a grisly way for Haman to go. Haman's execution, however, doesn't solve the problem of the decree to kill all of the Jews. So the focus now turns to Esther and Mordecai as they make a plan to reverse the decree. They discover that the king can't revoke a decree that he's already made. So instead, the king commissions Mordecai to issue a counter-decree. On the appointed day that all of the Jews were supposed to be killed, the 13th of Adar, now the Jews are ordered to defend themselves and to destroy any who plotted to kill them. Then Mordecai, Esther, and Jews everywhere hold banquets and feasts to celebrate this new decree, and Mordecai is elevated to a seat beside the king. Eventually, the decreed day comes, and the Jews triumph over their enemies. First, they destroy Haman's family, and then any other Persian officials who had joined in Haman's plot. And then on a second day, they get permission to destroy any who plotted against them throughout the entire kingdom. This results in joy and celebration as the Jews are rescued from annihilation. The story then tells about how Esther and Mordecai established by decree this annual 2-day feast of Purim to commemorate their deliverance from destruction. And the name of the feast comes from Haman's dice. Remember, Purim. The book concludes with a short epilogue as Mordecai is elevated to second in command of the kingdom, and we are told now of his royal greatness and splendor as the Jews thrive in exile. Now, step back. Notice how this whole story has been designed. The story was full of moments of ironic reversal, but we can now see the whole story is structured as an ironic reversal, right down to the details. So the king's splendor and feasts and decrees are mirrored by Mordecai's splendor and feasts and decrees at the end. Esther and Mordecai, they first saved the king, but now in the end they save all of the Jews. Then you have Haman's elevation and edicts and banquet that gets reversed by Mordecai's elevation and edict and banquet. And then at the center, you have Esther and Mordecai's planning scenes, and then Esther's 2 banquets that act as a frame around the greatest moment of reversal in the whole story: Haman's humiliation and Mordecai's exaltation. Beautiful. Another fascinating feature of this book is the moral ambiguity of the characters. There's a lot of drinking and anger and sex and murder, of which Mordecai and Esther are a part. Not to mention their violation of many commands in the Torah, like marrying Gentiles or eating impure foods. And so the story's not putting Mordecai and Esther forward as moral examples, as if it endorses all of their behavior. But they are put forward as models of trust and hope when things get really bad. And so the book of Esther comes back to that question with which we begin: why God is not mentioned. The message of this book seems to be that when God seems absent, when his people are in exile, when they're unfaithful to the Torah, does this mean that God is done with Israel? Has God abandoned his promises? And the book of Esther says no. It invites us to see that God can and does work in the real mess and moral ambiguity of human history. And he uses the faithfulness of even morally compromised people to accomplish his purposes. And so the book of Esther asks us to be willing to trust God's providence even when we can't see it working, and to hope that no matter how bad things get, God is committed to redeeming his world. And that's what the book of Esther is all about.
Pretty awesome book. I have one thing that I would add as like a, I don't know if I would say a correction, but a change to me from the Bible Project video, which is the part where they say Esther and Mordecai are not moral examples to follow, because I disagree with that thought in here. And I'm not quite sure why they say that. I think it's because the Bible Project is an evangelical group, and so because they're drinking and partying and things, it's kind of, that's like the line that they draw. All of the Bible is filled with people who engage in human behavior, like killing everyone else around them and stuff. That's like there throughout, so I'm not sure why suddenly Esther gets thrown under the bus. Like, that part doesn't quite make clear, especially when for Esther's story, it's about imminent survival and not conquering. So I think it has to do with some other parts. And also this, for me, when I look also at the king that's mentioned here, he is also a type. Esther and Mordecai are types. They're an archetype of an ideal Jew, how to follow God in the exile. And the king is the type of a stupid king who doesn't do anything right, and he gets manipulated all around him. And he's not doing the things a king is supposed to be doing. He's going around and drinking. Same, I forgot to mention this, but his name is a little bit hard to translate. Like, we're like, it might be Xerxes, it might be Artaxerxes. We're not really sure. And in the Greek and the Hebrew versions, it's different too. It's almost like you mix together a name like Obamald or something. Like you mix Obama and Donald. It's like you mix two rulers and then they do something that rulers would never do. And so like Persian kings didn't stay at their palace and drink for more than half the year. Particularly Xerxes. He was out conquering the whole world around him. He wasn't always hanging out back at his palace and doing things like that. And during this time frame, he also was like conquering Egypt and things like that. And so just think this is, the king is not supposed to be doing what the king is supposed to do. He's back and partying and not doing what he's supposed to do, which is also an example for the type of leadership we are to have too, is do good work. And if you don't do good work like the king, look what happens, and everyone's going to trick you and take advantage of you. And we see that happening with him. So let's jump straight into chapter 1. There is this great banquet that takes place, and this is specifically for the administrators of the Persian Mede Empire. And for all intents and purposes, when I say Persian Empire going forward, fill in with your brain that I'm saying Persian Mede Empire, because that is different than the Persian Empire, and this is when they were joined, and after this they kind of split up and fight and stuff. But I'm just going to keep saying Persian Empire. It's Persian Mede. And they were known, the Persian Empire was known for their gross bureaucracy. As you can see on this map, and here in our text, it's like they have 127 provinces over the whole world, essentially. And they would, just like with Babylon, they didn't conquer Babylon. They went into Babylon, and one day it became under the Persian rule, and nothing changed. The same laws were in place, the same administrators were in place and everything. So it was very bureaucratically heavy. It was more like a legal entity than exactly a military branch, although they did have a world-renowned military as well. And the king here just has this elaborate banquet for 180 days for these administrators. It's just this gross display of wealth and power and opulence and hedonism and stuff. I mean, it's crazy. And this is also when they are at court. And so Esther takes place when everything is at court. If you're ever into like medieval novels or timepieces, movies like that, and you'll see depictions of things are always like the French court, where all of the royals were there together and politicking and scheming and trying to one-up everyone and things like that. This is like a Persian court scene. It was not quite as elaborate as the French court. The French court was crazy, but everyone's here politicking and scheming and things like that, which didn't happen all the time. Then the king has a public feast for everyone else. So this first one is for all the administrators, and now it's for the normal people. And I love this picture here because it's like they're drinking these gold goblets that are bowls of wine, and the wine is just overflowing. For 7 days they're drinking, and they're drinking. It was elaborate. There was a lot of wine. The king drank without restraint. And notice the theme of the drunk king who makes stupid choices, because that's also what's going to happen here. So he calls the queen Vishti in. Her name in Persian means beloved. And so we get like, here's a character that everyone loves, and he brings her in to humiliate her and objectify her. And she, I was ahead of myself. That hasn't happened yet. Sorry. She is hosting a banquet for the women, which is here as a plot device to say they're in different places. So the king is super drunk, and he has his 7 eunuchs, and we're not going to name them. Eunuchs are usually young boys that were collected. They could have also been people who were already trained in government, but because they were castrated, you didn't have to worry about them getting in the way, essentially. They could not overthrow you because they couldn't have kids. They were seen as less desirous for other like political power and things like that. And so they were great administrators. And he sends his 7 eunuchs to go collect Vashti. She says no, and the king gets mad. If you look up Vashti painting, this is probably the painting that will come up. And I like this one because you can see her covering herself and hiding her in shame. And so I don't want you to be confused. When it says he wanted to parade her around, what that meant. It was not to show her intellect. It's to say it another way. And so I like this painting because she's in shame and she's covering herself. He wants her to put a crown on. He wants to show her off. It's his trophy wife that he has collected. And this is a king who gives in to lots of his desires. She says no, he gets mad. And so I want to point out this too. Notice, or save this as a reference, both Esther and Vashti disobey the king. So the difference is that Esther, when she does this, she does it with humility, and she's on God's side, to use our language we've used here. She has God's favor. Vashti says no to the king, disobeys him. She gets dethroned. Esther disobeys the king, and she gets elevated. For me, this is one of those other hidden moments of God's providence working behind the scenes, if that makes sense. I just want to add that as a note. The king is upset, and he consults with his lawyers, and so he has all of these sages, and here's an emotionally insecure man whining, which is what the king is doing here. And so they instruct him to ban Vashti from ever coming before the king's presence, and then to go further than that, to dethrone her, give her position to another. The reason they say that, they say, look, your wife dishonored you in front of everyone. And if you do that, what they say is all of the wives of the kingdom, what they're saying is then our wives are going to disobey us. And so they recommend that he write this creed for all of the women of the kingdom to obey their husbands. And so the decree is going to come out in the next slide, that men rule their own households. And I made this as a joke last night, and someone thought I was serious. I said this was the beginning of patriarchy, which is not the beginning, but yeah. I also want to note this. All of these sages and these elders that give the advice, they make an argument that it's for the whole kingdom. But what they want is their own benefit. And that is something that not a lot of, actually, I don't think any commentary has pointed out, but to me, when I think about this king as like a character that we're also looking at, he keeps getting it, people keep taking advantage of him, and he's too drunk to notice. He doesn't know how to think clearly. He listens to everyone else in his own ego, essentially. And so, yeah, a little bit of a conflict of interest. And so they send this out, a decree in every language that everyone could know. They have a great postal service. That men are the masters of their own houses. No wives can disobey. That is the end of chapter 1. Jumping into chapter 2, we're very quickly going to see how Esther becomes queen. So they have a Miss Persia beauty contest. They send out an empire-wide request for all of the beautiful young virgins to come before the king. They are in Susa, and they are brought into the harem to begin cosmetic treatments. Essentially, they're about to go for a really long spa. I pointed this out last night of why they would do this. If you look at pictures of people, like even from 100 years ago, like their skin is more wrinkled and aged with weather spots and other things. We have great skincare routines because we have like lotions and oils, and we just lather them up all over ourselves all the time. We are inside, the sun is not there on us, things like that. That is not normal in history, so this was a time for people to have their skin look pretty. Beauty was seen in a lot of places, here included. The whiter you were, the more beautiful you were because you weren't touched by the sun, which was a show of wealth because you didn't have to go outside and work in the fields or do other things like that. Same thing with your hands, how smooth they were, and how hydrated and oiled up your skin was, things like that. So that's what this cosmetic treatment part's going to be. This is also where we are going to get introduced to Mordecai and to Esther. Mordecai is a Jew. He is a Benjamite, which remember that he's a Benjamite. He's not just any Jew, he's a Benjamite. And his cousin, Hadassah, who is called Esther, he has adopted and raised as his own daughter. So we already see a little bit about the character of Mordecai. He's a good guy. He reached out to his cousin / like kind of niece to take care of her. And what happens with Esther is that she wins the favor of the keeper of the women. So she's at the lower rung of a sex slave, is her position that she's starting at. She has won that favor and is taken into the palace. And Mordecai instructs her to keep her Jewish identity a secret, which at this point, and if you were reading this, you would go, why? And that becomes very clear shortly. There as a plot point. That becomes important. She is not starting off in a good place. This is not, oh, how nice for Esther, is not what's going on here. She is at the lowest bottom rung of a harem. and she is also being locked away. It's not like a Disney princess movie. She's being locked away in a dungeon or in the palace grounds. She has no rights. She has no voice. She is an object to be used and objectified and used for the king's pleasure and whatever else the king wants. That's where we are with Esther right now. Not a happy moment, and it's going to get worse in the next chapter, but we'll keep going through here. So Esther is going to undergo 12 months of beauty treatments, 6 months with oils, and then she gets perfumes and stuff. And she has now been elevated. She has worked her way up, and now she's under the care of the head of the concubines. And there is a note here in this section that she is never, ever not to go to the king unless he calls her by name. Remember the character of the king. We have a drunken idiot that doesn't even know how to listen to his own advisors correctly. And the only hope for Esther that she'll ever leave this position, now she's in the middle of the harem. She's upgraded from a sex slave to a concubine, is that the king might remember her name. You hope he was sober that day when he came. So she's not in a good place. But guess what? And this is where we see God sort of working behind the scenes to bring something about. Esther is going to become queen. She listens to every... Oh, was I going to tell you something about this picture? I was going to tell you something about this picture. This is a picture of Esther becoming queen, which is why she is in white. I think the white is not typical of Persian dress, but you can see her fixed with lots of jewels and everything. And there's a lion and an eye, which are important signs of Persian power. And so that is why there's there. We are seeing her become more powerful. I think I'm correct about the white not being typical, but used for us. So Esther listened to her advisors and it worked. This is a moment when we see her wisdom. That she didn't try to think on her own or make up something. She listened to the wisdom of others. And that's a piece of wisdom we learned from Esther. She listened to her advisors, and it worked. And so in the 7th year of the king's reign, she is chosen above all others. She is crowned. She has become a queen. This is not to say she is the only queen yet, but she has become a queen. And they hold this great feast in her honor called Esther's Banquet. And so this is kind of a happy point. We're like, oh, joy. And the king just, why not? He just forgives everyone's taxes and gives them a whole bunch of gifts too. And so this is a celebratory moment. Esther has made it. She has become queen, but nobody knows who she really is. And so she is hidden still. She is still hidden. She has not become the star yet. Then there's this note that Mordecai uncovers a plot. Some people asked me last night, like, what was Mordecai's deal? Why is he always hanging out at the gate? Maybe he was some type of guard or something like that. Or he just really liked the way the gate looked. But Mordecai is always at the gate, probably some type of employment there as a gate guard. And he hears people, the Hebrew is they try to lay hands on the king, probably that they are trying to kill the king. And so Mordecai tells Esther. Esther lets the king know and lets him know in Mordecai's name. They investigate it, and the plotters they get killed. And so this is written down in the Chronicles of the day, which was the official record of everything that the king does. And just note how Mordecai is not rewarded. So he is never told thank you. He is never given a gift, which is what you would expect to happen from a guy that just saved the king's life. But he was a drunken idiot and he didn't remember anything that was going on. Or he was just too mad to remember to be happy or something. This is where we are. We have done chapters 1 and 2. This is a picture of the king's greatness. He can call the whole world to his palace, stop everything for half a year. He can drink as much wine as he wants. He can call every young virgin from all over the world to himself for a beauty pageant. And then he can just kill whoever he wants and never give anything a break. This is a picture of the king in Persia's just fatness in the sense of its opulence. This will be mirrored at the end of the book when Mordecai is elevated. Chapter 3, we're going to zoom in and learn about Haman. Haman is so Mordecai is the guy that should have been promoted, but for some reason it's Haman instead. And so Haman is made second in command. He is a powerful position. And all of the servants are supposed to bow to him. This does not mean worship him. It is a sign of respect. It is unclear why Mordecai refuses to do so. It could be a pride moment where he's just like, well, I'm not going to bow to that guy over there. But it's probably related to who Haman is as a descendant of the king of the Amalekites, which is why he's an Agagite. And so they have a family feud going on, and so he won't bow down to him. I like this picture of Haman because he has a big head. I just think that's funny. Haman is angry. In the Hebrew, it says it was not good enough, or it was beneath him to only kill Mordecai for not respecting him. And so he now seeks, as he finds out he's a Jew, to kill all of the Jews everywhere. This is this incredibly large escalation. And you wouldn't believe it, but somebody built a time machine, went back and got a digital photo of the moment when Haman found this out. And this is him being really mad and upset. Haman is the pouty face that's really upset. And so Haman is going to begin a plot by the casting of pure, which is a dice or a lot. I've showed you this picture before, what like ancient lots might look like. On the top is bones that are carved. They would see how they lay out. They could also be rocks that are carved in. They could have used other pieces. We just don't have fossil records of them. But we have the stones and the bones. And Haman is going to cast the pure. And in Hebrew, im just means plural. And so it's like we went from lot to lots is the festival name of Purim. And he's going to figure out when the massacre is going to take place for what he wants to do. And a time gets picked. It's about a year later. And that's where Purim gets its name from. And then we're going to see some racism, some fear-mongering, and blind trust. Haman goes to the king, and he says, hey, there are these certain people, and they are scattered, which is to say they're everywhere throughout the kingdom, but also they're not all joined together where they could be more powerful, so they're weak right now, and they have different laws. This is true. The way the Persian Empire's weird bureaucratic administration worked, there was local small kind of kingdom collection things everywhere else. This is not true. And he said they don't obey the king. That was not true. They did obey the king. And so the king is like, oh my gosh, wow, there's these problem people. Here's 10,000 talents, which is the equivalent of hundreds of millions of dollars today. It is just an absurd amount of money. And he's just like, here you go. Here's my credit card. And here's like my the number, your routing number and stuff like that too. And then he gives the king his signet ring. And one thing that we're going to find that's here in the text, it's here in the story of Esther, that becomes a very important plot point, is that the king's signet ring is signed. That is with the king's authority. And no one can undo a law of the king, not even the king himself. Once something is put into law, there's no way to undo it. That is not something we find in the historical record, but it's very important for the story that's being told here. He has just given Haman the power of everything. He's a drunk idiot. That's like what we're seeing here. He's not doing what a king is supposed to do. I also want to make mention of this. There was a little bit of a language gap, and we see some of Haman's scheming. Haman says, what Haman asks, and it's a little bit unclear in our English translations, but it sounds like he says, can we enslave these people? But then in the decree that he writes, it's to destroy the people. And so here it is in the Hebrew. Enslave is lashabed, and destroy is lashamed. And remember how Haman is descendant from the Amalekites. He's a Canaanite where they speak Hebrew. The king does not speak Hebrew. He speaks Persian. And so if he is saying this in Hebrew, the king couldn't hear the accent difference. It is yet a moment where Haman has tricked the king, just like the advisors tricked the king. They're using him for their own good. And so the king, if he had done what a king was supposed to do and drafted his own law, this new thing wouldn't have happened, but now it does. And so the decree is sent. It is sent to every province. It just so happens this is on Passover, remember, Passover is when the lamb's blood was scattered on the post of the doors when Israel was in Egypt, and they were spared and they were saved. So it's a little bit of foreshadowing happening here. And this is what the decree is, that all Jews everywhere, no matter the age, young and old, men, women, children, everyone, are all to be destroyed, not enslaved, destroyed. In case that wasn't clear, killed. In case that wasn't clear, annihilated. And to go even further, you can plunder all of their belongings as well. What this sort of means is now your neighbor who might want what's in your house is out to get you. This is a bad moment. And private armies are going to rise up to ransack these other households and everything throughout the whole kingdom. This is just unprecedented and insane. And this is a bad day because there's no way to undo this decree. Here is a picture of a decree that Cyrus the Great sent out, which would have been a king just a little bit at the time before Xerxes. And so you can see what it's like. And that's set in stone. There is no way to undo it. The whole city is perplexed. Everyone is freaking out because this has happened. And the king and Haman sit down to drink and throw a party. A lot of drinking, yeah. Not doing what the king is supposed to do. This is where we are. Haman has been elevated. He sends out this decree. In the Greek version, it goes into more detail about what that decree is. And it uses language from the book of Daniel for some of the accusations against the Jews. Remember, we are a type of person. We are supposed to, as people who follow God, live differently. But that does not mean that we are rebellious and causing all of these issues. We just stand out. And so, but they are using that standing out as an accusation of rebellion, which is not true. Understandably, now everyone freaks out. We see the mourning most clearly in Mordecai. He tears his clothes. He puts on sackcloth. Thank you. What? In ashes, and he fasts and he wails. Typically, in this list of ritualized mourning, prayer would follow. It is not here in the Hebrew version. In the Greek version, we get Mordecai's prayers. And this mourning is spread throughout the whole kingdom. People are freaking out. And there's also this note here that no one is allowed to enter inside the king's gates while they are in sackcloth. They had to be in their royal garb. He wasn't wearing his uniform, is what's happening here. And so Mordecai is now sitting outside the gate. He's not on the gate. He's not in the gate. He can no longer go to Esther because she's locked up inside. And so I like this painting in the collection, or this mural, because Esther suddenly looks older. She is not a young, pure virgin or young woman anymore. She has been jaded by the reality of the world. And here she is unrolling the scroll of the decree. You can see the seriousness setting in. I don't know what to do now, is kind of what her face is saying. Esther hears about this distress and all that's happening, so she sends her eunuch to go to Mordecai. She can't go out there. And also, she's not supposed to be seen with Mordecai because nobody knows of their connection. And he will not accept the garments from Esther. She tries to give him new garments so he can come to her, but she won't do that. He won't do that. But he does send her a copy of the decree and charges Esther to go to the king. And this is when we're about to get to the crux of the story, and we'll begin to see who will Esther become. What happens when someone goes to the king uninvited? They get killed unless the king holds out a scepter. And Esther's like, dude, I can't do that. And so that's the next part, is Esther's fear. This is another piece in the collection, and I don't have the full image here, but it's showing her opulence, her riches. She has everything that she could want as the queen. But as the color goes on, there's more color, and it fades, and then it goes into black and white, and she's behind bars, and her feet are pierced through the bars of the gate. She's not allowed to act or move. Even though she's queen, she is still stuck as a slave. She is hidden at the moment. We're about to see Esther come out as a star. We'll see it next week. But Esther's afraid. So she sends back. She's like, Mordecai, you know this. I can't go in the court. The king hasn't even called on me in over a month, which kind of means he's forgot about he doesn't want her anymore. He's moved on to another young virgin or something. He doesn't need her. And this is a death sentence unless he holds out his scepter, which is a detail here for us. And here is Mordecai's response. This is the part that gives you goosebumps when you read the story. He says, you won't escape the fate of the rest of us. If we all die, you will find out, you will be killed too. God will, or he doesn't say God in the Hebrew version. It does in the Greek. But he says relief and deliverance will come for the Jews from someone else. But he says, who knows if you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? This is the line for me that stands out. That all of this hardship that Esther has gone through, being sent across the kingdom, going through all that she went through, which was not, it wasn't just a small day. It wasn't happy that all of this happened. What if this was all orchestrated for such a time as this? This is an idea that is there throughout Scripture. That these moments, no matter how big, no matter how small, God is working them together, God is orchestrating them, or at least God is using them to bring about deliverance and rescue of the world. We see it so clearly. Think back to Joseph. Joseph gets sold as a slave by his own brothers, thrown into a pit, treated like an animal and a slave as dead, and sold off to Egypt. Then he ends up in prison, but becomes second to the Pharaoh and rescues all of Israel in that. And it was because of Joseph's bravery and his wisdom. And now we see it's Esther's. Will she rise to the occasion? That's the question. And there explicitly, if we read Esther as this book of poetry, as this type of ideal person who follows God, will you rise to the occasion when it's your turn? That's the question. What if you were placed in your life for such a time as this? What if you are here at this church for such a time as this? What if you are living here in Knoxville for such a time as this? It's a great question to ask. We're going to see Esther's response. She gathers all of the Jews to fast and to pray, which is there in the Greek, for 3 days. And this is where she says, I will go to the king, and if I perish, I perish. She is throwing her life now into God's hands and saying, look, I don't know what the outcome will be, but I know I have to act with what little power I have, no matter how hopeless it looks. And that is a question that we are going to end our time with. I forgot to change this. When have you needed, and it might be right now, to rise to the occasion for such a time as this and show the bravery and the wisdom of Esther? You could be thinking about a time in your life in the past when you acted, things looked hopeless, you needed to do something with what little power you had. You could also be thinking about something right now. And if you got a little pit in your stomach and you're like, man, I wish I could do something about this, that's probably the thing. So I will set our 5-minute timer. We'll answer that in our discussion groups. And if you want to share after the timer, I will invite you to share then.
Oh, yeah.
So what happened? I was in college. And I found out that I found
Yeah, Rick and I had it at the same time. We didn't know it until. Emily, no, yes. I think it's Emily Nichols. Yeah. They really said after 5 days you wear a mask.
When I saw
Yeah.
catch it.
That's what I felt when I got the second dose. Oh, really?
Yeah. Nothing, actually, the people, they got.
This is
Everybody's out there. Oh.
Do what?
Everybody's. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Does anyone have a story or calling that they might want to share? Like a story of the past or a calling to right now?
Well, I was discussing, I had a difficult time with this subject because I don't consider myself particularly brave. But we were talking about, standing up. Actually, Allie kind of encouraged me to tell this. I had an opportunity to go to Thailand, and I was with a group of people, about 10, and one of the things we were to do one of the days was to prepare food for the Buddhist monks in training, and go, and they would process down the street, and they would go to each group of people and get the food. Well, they asked us when the Buddhists came by, and they were like boys, 14, 15 year old boys, to kneel. to give them the food, and I refused. I really was offended by it because I told the group, I don't kneel to anyone but my God. And so I was respectful, but so perhaps Allie seemed to think it was brave. I don't know how brave it was. But I just felt very strongly about that.
Glad Haman wasn't there.
Yeah, me too.
No, I think that is a moment of bravery, and sharing that with us is a moment of bravery. So thank you.
It's often hard to stand up for your convictions when feel like you're the only one in a group. It's hard to do.
And I was, because they all it just shocked me, because they all knelt to these, and not out of disrespect, but I mean, these young boys in training, and I just found it amazing that none of them pushed back.
What was their reaction when you didn't? What was their reaction?
Actually, they kind of got used to me. There were a few things that we did that was part of the curriculum that I refused to do. And, you know, I think they just thought, who's the oddball? but that's okay. That doesn't bother me. But they really didn't say, they didn't say anything, and they didn't criticize. I mean, they just kind of ignored it.
Where was this?
In Thailand, Bangkok. It was. Of course, the trip was great, and Thailand is a very, very interesting and beautiful experience. But there were just certain things that they had planned that just didn't go along with my values. So,
Does anyone have maybe something they could share that's a right now moment, something you feel called to in this moment in time?
How about you?
Well, this moment. I had a story of in the past that was a moment that I think I may have actually had shared once in here before. But I was when I was in high school, I was on the student government. I was the president, and as part of that, I think I was on the accreditation board for my school and on the governance board, and leading to that and some other stuff, there was the guy that was the headmaster at the time. I got to help him be deposed as the headmaster, and that caused a lot of ruckus at the school. And my class size went from 14 to 5, and I was going to leave and stay because he got removed. And I am not someone who enjoys confrontation or different things like that. And that was one of the proudest moments that I was of me in my life, was helping him, because he was inappropriate and abusive to young girls and other people and stuff. And so, it was a hard, weird moment, particularly in a religiously tight community. And so, and there was other teachers who were like, be careful with what you say. The new president brought me in, or principal, and sat me down, and I was like, I was. But I got in trouble from them, so it was just weird.
Yeah.
But that was one of those moments that I hope I be that brave later in my life too. And that for me is why when I look at Esther, I find her bravery to be inspiring. And so as you go from this week, I would encourage you to pray about what your such a time as this is. Who are the people around you who need deliverance? Who are the people around you that you can be a person of hope for? And what little power you have can make a big difference, even when things look hopeless, which is how it looked here. And we're going to see how Esther is now going to become the main actor in the story next week. So I will see you next week for Esther 5 through 7. The Lord be with you.
Also,
My God, we thank you for Esther and for examples of bravery. May we be brave too. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
That's okay.
but